I am very interested in the discussion that ensues in terms of next steps. So I will just briefly say a few words about where we are today. And where we are today is much further ahead in many respects than I ever expected we would be when I was first elected in 2015. The issue of fairness in our criminal justice system, of evidence-based drug policy, and of reforming our drug policies towards decriminalization and regulating substances according to their respective harms is an issue that I care about, have long cared about, and I've advocated for ever since I was first elected. And when I first raised the issue in my own party and in public, there was not only a dismissal, but there was a politicization of the issue such that my position was subject to attacks, and it was put to the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister, how could this be a position of a member of your party? And we've moved a distance from that kind of attack. And it's thanks in large measure to the advocacy organizations that have raised their voice, to police chiefs and prosecutors that have raised their voice. But tragically, it is because of the opioid crisis in many respects too, and the thousands of lives that have been lost that have shifted the conversation. And I hope if we learn anything from the crisis through which we're living in relation to the pandemic, that it is we need to listen to public health experts, and we need to follow the advice of public health experts as it relates to, in this context, how to save lives. And we know we can save more lives if we remove the criminal sanction. And in Parliament, in party politics, I'd introduced a resolution that was then adopted by enough of my caucus. It got to the floor. It became 2018 party policy. And immediately the Prime Minister and the Health Minister at the time, Jeanette, said, well, now is not the time. And they came out quite strongly against decriminalization. And what I've learned in the course of my short time in politics is how decriminalization is understood and communicated presents a political challenge, and that people are in the leadership positions that I have seen, they're afraid of the word decriminalization, and they don't use it openly, and they shy away from it because they fear, and oftentimes it does become more conservative opponents that will say, well, it means drugs on street corners, and it means it'll mean legalization and a free for all, and it'll mean an increase in the use of substances that we want people to avoid. And I think we have to push back in a number of different ways with the evidence, and to say, as the evidence indicates, many individuals use substances without issues, and their recreational use, and there isn't the problematic use that we ought to be concerned about as governments and as public officials concerned about citizen safety. But the other thing I would say is, obviously, and everyone knows this, I think, who's listening, but the decriminalization is obviously counterproductive to the very aims that we seek to achieve. And that being the case, the real question is, how do we address the politics? And I think everyone needs to, raise their voices. People in my position, in Don's position, and others need to continue to be public as possible, and calling for a move towards decriminalization as quickly as possible in order to save lives, and safer supply options in order to save lives, and elevate the public discourse in that way. And we also, as far as I'm concerned, need to work within the existing constraints to move the needle as well. And so that was really, I introduced 2 private members' bills in advance of the pandemic taking hold at the end of February of last year. And one of those was just simply delete the possession offense, and that was my preferred option. But recognizing the political reality, I wanted to move the needle. And so I introduced a second option that has actually become government legislation that, in the language of officials, would make it virtually impossible for prosecution of drug possession to proceed successfully. And that is not where I want to get in the end, but that will help, I think, move the conversation in a really positive direction. And so what I am hoping to achieve out of this conversation is really what comes next, where both on decriminalization and on the question of safer supply options, what is best to push the federal government to do next. And I'm very interested, because I want to continue to be a vocal advocate on this front, what others think via questions or comments. What do we think is most achievable, and hope to share some other answers in conversation.
Thank you very much, Nate, and thanks for the work that you've been doing in Parliament to bring this issue forward and advance the legislative agenda.